Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reezy Scorecard. Today, we're looking at one of the most controversial heavyweight title fights of all time, and that's the first fight between Lennox Lewis and Evander the Real Deal Holyfield. So as you know, the judges in this one had this one a draw. That is pretty tough to stomach. I actually had this fight scored for Lennox Lewis, 10 rounds to 2, 118 to 110. I put the permissible range as 7-5 Lewis, 115 to 113, to 10 to 2 Lewis, 118 to 110. But you'd have to be extremely generous to give Holyfield, to give it to Lewis 7-5. I think the rounds where you could make up the difference for Holyfield to get into that permissible range are rounds 8, 9, 10, and 11. And Stanley Christodoulou, who had the fight 116 to 113 for Lewis, 7-4-1, had most of those rounds for Holyfield, except he gave round 11 10-10. So that's the permissible range, I would say, 7-5 Lewis to 10 to 2 Lewis. But I lean heavily towards 10 to 2 Lewis, because I think even the rounds where you could potentially give to Holyfield, Lewis is still the ring general. Lewis is still controlling the rounds with his jab. Lewis is landing more. He's landing cleaner. And all around, he just looks more effective, even in the rounds where Holyfield is getting in and landing some stuff. So when you look at the other two scorecards, Eugenia Williams, 115 to 113 for Holyfield. That's a pretty rough scorecard. And especially because she scored round 5 for Holyfield, and round 5, Lewis pretty much just beats up Holyfield on the ropes. Larry O'Connell, 115 to 115, a draw. I have to say that's also a really rough scorecard. That comes out to 5 rounds to each guy, 2 rounds even. That's a pretty uncharitable scorecard for Lewis. And what did I have for Larry O'Connell? Oh, he scored round 7, 10 to 10. And that round I have in my notes, Lewis beats the shit out of Holyfield for most of this round. So round 7, it's hard to see how that one's 10-10. If he just scores that one 10-9 to Lewis, which I'm sure is what most people's scorecard was, then he ends up getting that one right. So as it stands, it was a draw, and Reezy's scorecard was 10 to 2, 118 to 110 for Lennox Lewis. So let's get into it. Round 1, I scored for Lewis. I scored it clear. So he controls most of the round with his jab. He really, this is going to be the theme for the fight. He lands his jab. He's in control. He's a ring general. Holyfield lands a powerful combination at the end of the round, but Lewis has done enough to establish his dominance in the round. 10-9 for Lewis. Round 2, I also went with Lewis clear. And this is honestly one of Lewis's best rounds of the fight. But Holyfield's just not landing anything here. Lewis is dominating the round with his jab. And then when he gets a chance, sometimes he's throwing in the straight right hand behind the jab, but sometimes he's giving Holyfield kind of awkward angles, and he's just going in straight with the straight right hand, almost like a jab, and he's popping Holyfield with it all night. He's mixing in hooks and uppercuts to the body when they're available. He's so patient this fight. He's working behind the jab, and then once he sees the opportunity for a straight right, once he sees the opportunity for hooks and uppercuts to the body, he's getting them in when they're available, and he's a tactician. When you look at the punch stats at the end, he's 348 for 613. Lands 57% of his punches. He thoroughly beats Holyfield in all those categories. 348 out of 613, 57% on that many punches in a heavyweight fight is crazy. That's insane. So that just goes to show how good he is when he does open up. So after 2, 10-9 for Lewis. So I have a 2018 for Lewis. Round 3, I give it to Holyfield close. And I still want to give this round to Lewis. He's still doing everything he does the rest of the fight in terms of controlling the fight with his jab, controlling the distance, winning 2 minutes and 15 seconds of this round. But Holyfield stuns him not once, but twice in this round. And you really can't get stunned. You can get stunned once, I think, and win a round. But you can't get stunned twice. And Holyfield does land a couple of real good hooks. I think the first time he stuns him with a left hook, The second time, way later in the round, he stuns him with a right hook. So I still label it close. I wouldn't necessarily begrudge somebody for giving it to Lewis, but that would probably be in the strong minority. So after three, 2-1 for Lewis, 29-28. And round four, I give to Lewis close. This is another one that Eugenia Williams scored for Holyfield, and I have it close, but it's close but clear. This is definitely just, a textbook Lewis round. He's dominating with his jabs, and he's picking his spots for combinations. So Holyfield, I guess what stole it for him this round on Williams' scorecard is the couple of hooks he landed late. But, as a disciplined judge, I think you want to look at 2 minutes and 45 seconds of work from Lewis rather than a couple of flashy hooks late from Holyfield, at least in my mind. So I give round four to Lewis. Round five, I give to Lewis clear. And for at least the first 2 minutes, maybe about the first 1 minute and 45 seconds, Lewis hurts Holyfield, or at least stuns Holyfield multiple times and just pushes him to the rope and just beats him up on the ropes for most of this round. This is just like round 7, where for most of the round, Lewis is just unloading his arsenal and beating up Holyfield on the ropes. There's really, I wrote like half a line on this one because it's just so easy. Lewis beats up Holyfield on ropes for most of the round, straight rights to the head and hooks to the body. But amazingly, Williams scored this one for Holyfield too. This along with round 7, which Larry O'Connell scored 10-10. I think you want to look at the whole fight. You don't want to throw out everything a judge did and you know what they noticed. But I think round 5, Williams scoring it for Holyfield, and round 7, O'Connell scoring 10-10 are kind of the most glaring weak spots of this fight, because you got to think it would still be controversial if it was a majority decision. But if Eugenia Williams just scores round 5 for Lewis, which he deserves, and Larry O'Connell scores round 7 for Lewis, which he deserves, then all of a sudden it's a majority decision. Nobody even remembers it. Lewis wins. It's no big deal. So someone, probably noticed, so Williams' scorecard, even if it was tied, still a little wonky, but nobody really cares about that. Nobody talks about, Mayweather Canelo anymore being a majority decision, because we all know what it was in that fight. So just a couple of rounds scored what's the correct way in my view. Could have changed this whole fight, could have changed boxing history. So like I said, round 5 for Lewis, clear. Round 6, I scored for Lennox Lewis. I scored it close. Holyfield comes out aggressive in this round, lands a couple of good hooks early. That's all he's really going to land in this fight. That's of note. If you look at his punch stats by the end, 130 of 385, landing only about 34% of his punches, which with Lewis landing 348, Holyfield only landing 130. You're not going to want to fight that way. But what Holyfield does land throughout the fight at different paces is the left hook and the right hook, both to the head. So that's all he really gets through. But Lewis does control most of the 6th round. He's got the arsenal going, and this is going to tie into round 7, because round 6, he's starting to mix it up a little. So he's throwing the jab, he's mixing in the straight rights. And near the end of the round, he throws a vicious right uppercut, and the camera angle is kind of bad, so I can't tell how clean it lands on Holyfield, but it shakes Holyfield's whole body, and he's definitely backing up after that. It's enough. It's not as good as the uppercut he hits Klitschko with a couple years later, but it's still a really good uppercut, and definitely, I think, enough to win the round. So round 7, Lennox Lewis. My notes. Lewis beats the shit out of Holyfield for most of this round. Lands clean with everything in his arsenal, ... Action slows in the last 60 seconds. So last 60 seconds, could be 10-10, because there's not much that happens in the last 60 seconds. I don't score 10-10, so it wouldn't be 10-10 in my mind. But the first 2 minutes of this round, Lewis this is peak Lennox Lewis. This is his best round of the fight. Could be one of the best rounds of his career. I mean, he just shows everything he has. He's throwing the jab. He's putting the straight right hand behind it. Sometimes when he's angling, he's circling around Holyfield, he's just coming in with the straight right without telling it, because he's not throwing the jab. So he's like sneaking it in there. He's landing body shots. He's landing hooks. Everything in his arsenal. I don't remember this round if he lands a clean uppercut. Of course, that's in his arsenal, but everything else he lands on Holyfield. So it's crazy to me. I have this a clear round. It's crazy to me that Larry O'Connell scored this one 10-10. And you never know. You never know what's going on here because Larry O'Connell, like Lennox Lewis, is also from the UK. He had scored a bunch of Lewis's fights prior to this. It's being a judge is a torture chamber. It really is. It's mental hell. You're wondering what your colleagues are scoring. Sometimes you're blocked off by the referee. Knowing that he was British, he could have, and Lewis is British, he could have done the reverse bias thing where he's trying to block out, okay, it's going to be expected, and this is an excuse, but it's going to be expected that I'm more sympathetic to Lewis. So I'm going to try to overcompensate and block that out. That could be it. Like I said, I think he had judged 3 of Lewis's fights before, so he was very familiar with him. His scorecards in those looked reasonable to me. So you don't know what was going on in his head. But, British judge, British fighter, they're fighting in the US. That's one possible excuse. But for round 7, there's nothing you can say about it because it's a really scoring that 10-10s. A bad round for O'Connell. So after 7, I actually have it a 6-1 for Lewis at this point. And I'm going to give round 8 and round 9 to Lewis too. Both of them close but clear in my mind. But this is where I start to differ with the judges because all of them, all 3 of them, Stanley Christodoulou, Eugenia Williams, Larry O'Connell, all score it either 4-0 for Holyfield or 3-0-1 even for Holyfield. So in rounds 8 through 11, not a single judge is going to give Lewis a round, which is extremely uncharitable to me. But these are the rounds that if you are going to make a case for Holyfield outside of round 3, you would make it in these rounds. And that's why it brings the permissible range for me to 115, 113 to Lewis, because you could make a case in these rounds. I just wouldn't make that case. And giving Lewis none of these rounds, like the 3 judges did, is wild to me. It's wild. Because like 8 and 9, for instance, and I think Harold Letterman also gave 9 to Holyfield. But round 8, Holyfield has his moments with the hook, sure, but it's another one where Lewis wins 2 minutes and 45 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, 50 seconds of this round. Holyfield lands some nice hooks in there, maybe 2. But Lewis is totally controlling the fight with his jab. And when he's throwing and landing, he's landing harder and he's landing cleaner. And it really overrides any good things that Evander does in that round for me. In round 9, there's just not much there. It's the slowest round of the fight. And Holyfield's aggressive, but I can't think of anything he did in round 9 that actually landed. This one's the hardest one for me to see giving it to Holyfield, even though I think it's in the permissible range. There's not a lot there, but I'm taking Lewis's jab over Holyfield's aggressiveness because Holyfield is the aggressor in round 9, but he's not the effective aggressor, not by a long shot. So he's charging in, sometimes not even punching. When he is punching, he's missing, but Lewis is consistently landing the jab throughout the round. And then in the mid to late portion of the round, he lands a nice short right hand that not wobbles Holyfield, but, stuns him. And it's enough for me. Without that short right hand, I still would have scored that one for Lewis. But the fact that he lands like a solid, memorable power punch, it's kind of the postcard, the stamp for that round. So keep in mind, all the judges had 8 and 9 for Holyfield. And I have them for Lewis, and they're close to me. They're competitive, but they're still Lewis rounds. And in the eyes of me, they're still Lewis rounds. So I give round 10 to Holyfield, and I scored it clear. This is the only clear Holyfield round I have scored of the fight. Even round 3, I put close, but round 10, I scored Holyfield. He gets his second win right here. In the broadcast, I don't remember if it's George Foreman or Jim Lampley, who notes that Holyfield takes longer than most heavyweights to get his second win. He gets tired, then he stays tired for longer moments of time than his other contemporary heavyweights. But they make that point. It's actually prescient here because he really doesn't start firing back aggressively until round 10. And this one, Lewis is still doing things I like. I would still say, even you can make the case that he's still the ring general, but Holyfield is getting inside this round. Every other round when he gets inside, he's just getting clinched up by Lewis. But this round, he's getting inside, and when he does, he's doing something with it. He's ripping Lewis to the head and body with hooks. And I would say he has 3 or 4 good flurries this round that pretty much negate anything Lewis does. So that's going to be the last round I give to Holyfield. So after 10, I have it 8-2 for Lewis. So if this was a 10-round fight, I would have scored it 98-92 for Lewis. And going into round 11, I scored it for Lewis. I mark extremely close. And it's just because midway through the round, Holyfield lands a huge right hook. It could be the best punch by either guy of the fight. Lewis isn't stunned or wobbled by it, but it's just something to note. But Lewis controls everything else. He does the same thing he does in every other round, where his jab just completely dominates the round. I don't have the punch stats round 11 in front of me, but I guarantee you Lewis would have tripled what Holyfield landed, maybe tripled or quintupled what Holyfield threw, and I'm sure he landed at a better percentage. So Holyfield lands one of the best punches of the fight, but I still give round 11 to Lewis because Lewis wins 2 minutes and 58 seconds of the round, and Holyfield wins his 2 seconds where he lands that best punch of the fight. So if you're watching the broadcast I watched on YouTube, which is a replay of the HBO TVKO broadcast, you can hear Emmanuel Stewart yelling at Lewis for, I don't know if it's for getting caught in the previous round, but he's basically saying, get back to what you're doing. Quit this bullshit you've been doing in rounds 8 through 11. You're kind of letting him hang around. And Lewis comes out, dominates round 12. Holyfield needs it at this point. Well, you would think he needs it, but obviously he didn't need it as much as we all thought. But even still on the judges' scorecards, no, I guess he didn't need it because they all scored this one for Lewis. So, that's crazy. Thinking that Lewis actually needed this round. That's insane, actually. But he controls this round with his jab. He's mixing in the occasional stinging straight right hand. He's doing the same thing where sometimes he's putting it behind the jab. Sometimes he's throwing it one off, then circling Holyfield. Then when he learned his lesson from round 10, and whenever Holyfield gets close, he just holds him. He doesn't let Holyfield get a chance to rip the hooks. He just holds him. So Reezy's scorecard is 118-110 for Lennox the Lion Lewis. 10 rounds to 2 for Lewis. I mentioned my permissible range was about 115, 113 Lewis, all the way up to 118, 110 Lewis. One of the judges, Stanley Christodoulou, scored at 116, 113 for Lewis, 7-4-1. That's a little close from my range, but it's still in my permissible range. Eugenia Williams, 113, 115 for Holyfield. That I don't think is an accurate reading of the fight. And Larry O'Connell, of course, at 115, 115, a draw. I also am not a huge fan of that scorecard. And I was actually reading, doing my research on this fight before I made this video. And obviously Wikipedia isn't the best source, but it mentioned that both of them actually apologized for this fight. Eugenia Williams said she watched it again and scored it a draw. And when she apologized, and Larry O'Connell didn't say what his new score would have been, but he also apologized. He said, I feel bad for myself for all the stuff I've been getting, but I feel even worse for Lennox Lewis. Of course, those both come from Wikipedia, but according to that, they apologized for their judging in this fight. Harold Letterman, the HBO ringside scorer, had it 9 rounds to 3, 117, 111 for Lewis, which I think that's a fair scorecard. We disagreed on round 9. He gave to Holyfield, I gave to Lewis. Everything else we agreed on. But that's it. Reezy scorecard, 118-110 for Lennox Lewis. This fight was not close. This was a clinic by Lewis. He deserved the decision in this one. So thank you for watching. And if you find any value from this, please like and subscribe.